Hey guys, this is Kerry, and in this video we're going to be finishing up the AP Explorer task by completing question 2D. Question 2D is a kind of beefy question. It's got some technological things that are important to pay attention to that might connect to Unit 9, but it also has some really interesting parts to me at the end here where we talk about some data privacy concerns or security concerns of the innovation that we've been researching. So without further ado, let's get started on question 2D. All right, so using specific details. Describe the data your innovation uses. Okay, so I know I'm going to be talking about data, so let me create a data section. We're going to be talking about how the innovation consumes as input, produces as output, and or transforms the data. How does it use the data? And then finally, we're going to be talking about a privacy or security concern related to the computing innovation. So I've set up 3 sections in my answer for me to get started. Now, I think similar to the last question, we had each chosen the computing innovation that we've been researching because we have a personal connection to it or a personal interest. So before you even get started with your research, I think it's good to lay out like a couple of the just like baseline ideas that you might have about these things. So for me, Zoom is a cloud conferencing service where you create a meeting, and then everyone that you invite to the meeting can join the meeting and talk live on video. You can record the videos. All right, so we're starting to get at what the data is, right? So the data is video information from cameras. It's also audio from microphones. There's text data in the chat. This data needs to be transmitted. Okay, that seems like how does it use the data? So, oops, the Zoom transmits the data using the internet so that all members receive video, audio, chat, broadcast. So that's one thing that we call it. It's a technical term, I think, broadcast here. It's not like broadcast like a TV, but when you broadcast information, everybody on that website receives in almost live time the information, the data that's been sent. Okay, so what other information? Oh, well, here's an interesting one, right? You can record video data from Zoom, and Zoom can store it on the cloud. So you can record your whole meeting, and then Zoom will actually store it, not on your computer, but on their server computers somewhere separate. So of course that's interesting because where are those server computers? How do they protect those server computers? Are they encrypting the video? Lots of interesting questions about that. Another question that I have about the data is, I guess this is a security privacy concern here, which is when we transmit the data, is it encrypted? So in the last unit, we looked at this picture of the internet, right? And we had a whole bunch of connections forming a web from router to router to router to router. And a hacker could actually hack into the wires or into the routers and listen for packets of information being transmitted through the internet. So what I'm wondering is when Zoom records my video, and it sends it to my friend's computer because we're playing a board game on Zoom or something, does it actually encrypt that data, or would a hacker who is listening for packets be able to decode that data and see my face? When we transmit the data, is it encrypted? Is it ever decrypted along the way so a hacker could access it? So that's really interesting to me because, right, like, if somebody's able to access my video data, I want to be aware of it at least. Next up, I was thinking too about the data that is stored, right? So whenever you connect to a website, the website needs to access certain information about your computer, like your IP address, so that it can send you information. The same is true about a Zoom call, right? If I want to share video, audio, data with you through the internet, then Zoom needs to know my IP address and your IP address so it can send information back and forth between those 2 addresses. So we're getting at something called data about users, I guess. So Zoom probably needs my IP address, or it definitely needs my IP address. It probably stores a password so I can log into Zoom. It probably stores a bunch of other information about me. So what other information is stored? And then another interesting thing is whenever you store information about data, you can start to think about metadata. And we talked about meta very early on in the semester. So what meta means is, in this case, metadata would be data about the data. And that's kind of a confusing idea, but it's not the data you're intending to send, but it's data about that data. So in this case, it could be like, does Zoom store information about the meetings or about the data, like meeting length, data transmitted. Zoom has this really interesting feature that I think I'm going to put down here in the privacy concern thing, which is Zoom actually has a tracker which can track if you're paying attention during a meeting. And what that means is if you're looking at other tabs, it'll actually catch that and send that information to the host. And that's a feature you have to enable, but I think it's a feature that people are not very aware of. So to me, that would be a privacy concern. Zoom has a tracker which can track if you're paying attention during a meeting or looking at other pages, other tabs. And related to that, right, if they're able to track this, then that makes me wonder, like, does Zoom store information about what pages you visit while you're on Zoom? I could just see this, someone attending a work meeting and then they go over to Reddit or whatever and they're goofing around. Not only does it catch them, but Zoom might actually have information about what web pages they've been accessing that they can share with their employers or things like that. So that's pretty interesting to me. So there's a lot going on with Zoom, and I think this is the main reason why I chose this for my research project. If you don't have an easy time filling this out, you can take as much notes as you possibly can here, and then you can start to look at the research part. Before I transition into the research part, I'm going to take a look at the rubric so I know what I'm being rated on. So 2D actually has 2 points attached to it, so row 6 is 1 point and row 7 is 1 point. So in row 6, we're meant to identify the data that identifies the data that the identified or described computing innovation uses, and explains how that data is consumed, produced, or transformed. And then row 7 is 1 point as well. Identify one data storage, data privacy, or data security concern related to the identified or described computing innovation. All right, so pretty straightforward. We've got to talk about the data, and we've got to talk about the privacy security concern. All right, so I think I'm ready to go. So I did some preliminary research, and my process for doing this was I just Googled phrases like, how does Zoom work? How does Zoom send so much data? How does Zoom store data? Zoom bombing? Zoom privacy concerns? Does Zoom encrypt video data? And I think all of these are really useful models for things you might Google while you're doing your research project. So you can just put in a bunch of those, click some of the most popular links here. If the link isn't helpful, you close down that tab and then you go to a new tab. If you're having a hard time finding this information on Google, or you kind of prefer video information, you can look on YouTube for the same information. And I think a lot of the time people will record similar things on YouTube where they talk about it. And then you can use that as a baseline and start to look up some written articles with a greater understanding of things. But I think using keywords like encrypt, privacy concern, security concern, data are all really key to answering this question successfully. All right, so what I did was I did that research and then I clicked a bunch of links. All right, so here we go. I think I'm ready to write my answer because I read through these before the video recording and because I didn't think it would be interesting for you guys to watch me read. So I'm going to start with the data component here, just making sure that I hit both rows. So I'm hitting row 6 now. So Zoom Zoom receives Zoom meeting rooms. Zoom meetings, sorry, it's hard to even phrase here. Zoom meetings take as input user audio, video, and text data in the chat as input to provide live video conferencing, Zoom then transmits this data using the internet to all of the users in the meeting. In terms of data usage, Zoom transmits, and I looked this up actually, I think this is really interesting. It transmits between 450 and 2.4, actually, okay, so diary, download, upload, I'm gonna go total, 810 megabytes and 2.4 gigabytes of data per an hour. Yep, I a typo, 810 megabytes and 2.4 gigabytes of user data every hour. And I'm going to cite the source. So this is whistleout.com AU. So this will be source 3 for me. I didn't have a source 3, although you probably did in the last video. So as you do that, you want to make sure that you are creating your bibliography. So let's see if I have the right format here. So scrolling down, it's the link, it's the author. So let's see if there's an author here, Alex Choros. The title, how much data does Zoom use? The website here is Whistleout. The date viewed is today's date. And I'm just getting this from actually my previous bibliography entry here instead of flipping back and forth. So 5/ is it the 20th? Yeah, the 20th, 2020. And then also the date posted is going to be 3/24/2020. All right, so completing the bibliography as we do this is really helpful because then we don't have to worry about doing that later on. I know it kind of interrupts our thoughts, but for me it's better just to do it all at once. So then after this, let's see, in order to do this, in order to transmit the data, Zoom requires all users' IP addresses so that it can send them the program or the data. All right, so let's see. Where did I find that out? I think that was here at security at Zoom. I'm having a hard time finding where I cited this, so I'm just going to leave it blank for now so that I don't spend too much time here. Authentication methods. I'm sure it was this actually, but I'm just not seeing it right the second as I'm doing this, so not to spend too much time just reading through that, I'm going to leave that blank and come back to it. All right, so now I'm going to start to think about the privacy security concerns here. So when Zoom transmits this data, they make sure, the company makes sure that the data is encrypted from end to end. And I thought this was really interesting. I didn't know this. And so this is something I've learned in my research here. I went to this website from a Wired post, and something that often happens when you're doing research is a news article might link you to a first-hand thing, which is a blog post. So here it talked about this blog post. So I clicked this link, and it took me to this blog post from Zoom. And then I got to read a lot more about encryption at Zoom. So actually, I found this super fascinating. I did not know this, but the data is actually encrypted end to end. What this means makes sure that the data is encrypted from end to end. What this means is the data is encrypted on the initial user's computer using a combination of asymmetric and symmetric encryption, two words that we talked about in the final lesson of the last unit, and they actually mention them up here. Let's see. Symmetric. Nope. It's in the Wired article that they mentioned symmetric, I think. Nope. Maybe it was this one. Nope. All right. Uh, nope. Nope. I know I found it. Oh, this is so frustrating. I guess I won't include the asymmetric and symmetric encryption if I closed out that window. What happened to this window? End-to-end encryption. Oh, here it is. Zoom uses both asymmetric and symmetric algorithms. There we go. I don't know why that didn't come up when I searched it. Using a combination of asymmetric and symmetric algorithms to, and I'm going to cite this to this website because it's a direct quote. So this will be source 4 for me, and I'm not going to go through actually doing that because that takes a long time to do and it's not particularly interesting to do. So I'm just going to put the link here, and you would know that you'd have to fill out the entire part of this. When Zoom transmits the data, the company makes sure that the data is encrypted end-to-end. What this means is that the data is encrypted on the initial user's computer using a combination of asymmetric and symmetric algorithms, and then it stays encrypted for the entirety of its transmission through the internet. Only being decrypted on the end user's computer. So this is super important, right? Because this data is encrypted as it's being transmitted, even if a hacker, what this means is that even if a hacker can access the data while it's in transit, they cannot read the information because it is encrypted. So this is actually an amazingly good solution to data privacy issues. All right, cool. And then finally, I wanted to get at the Zoom bombing idea. There's a little bit more I'd like to talk about with the data issues here. Zoom can store your videos on their cloud. There's this whole part where it's like, what other information are they collecting about users? And they came up under fire recently for something about that. Maybe we can get into that. There's this interesting article that I read here from The Guardian that talked about Zoom communicating information analytics data to Facebook. So a potential concern with Zoom's use of data is the company has shared information historically with apps like Facebook and Google in order to target users with ads. And I probably want to continue this, so I'll make a note here. I'm also going to use this Guardian article as a resource. There was another article that I found where they talked about using Google Ads information with Zoom. I want to finish up by talking about Zoom bombing here. So a privacy concern for users is the security, or the privacy is whether Zoom can guarantee privacy of its meetings. So in the past, when you made so privacy concern for users is whether Zoom can guarantee privacy of its meetings. This has come up a lot in current discussions about Zoom because of a phenomenon called Zoom bombing, where a stranger is able to access the meeting and interrupt the meeting. And so this was happening a lot. So there was this New York Times article that I found about that. To help ameliorate the privacy concerns, Zoom has created layers of complication to entering a meeting, such as having default password protection for meetings, and a feature called the waiting room. And you want to find sources for these things and mention it. All right, so let's see if I hit the main points for the rubric here. Analyzing data and information identifies the data that the identified or described computing innovation uses, explains how the data is consumed, produced, or transformed. So I think that we talked about audio, video, text data. We talked about how it transmits the data, and that would be transforming it to encrypt it using asymmetric and symmetric algorithms, keywords that we talked about in the last unit. We've also identified one data storage concern, which is the transmission of data being encrypted. And then we kind of went overboard here. We identified two more just out of kind of personal interest. So we've definitely hit row 6 and row 7. I definitely recommend that you take a look at the example response here for 2D, which would be the kind of data, sorry, here. You can read through that on your own and make sure that it's comparable to what you talked about here. I like that we got into the specifics about how much data is transmitted. I think specifics are always useful. So if you're using a computing innovation like an Apple Watch or a phone, you could look at how much memory does the phone store on it and its hard drive, how much RAM memory it has, what processing speed it has, all those things, how many pixels it has if you're focusing on a video thing. There's lots of ways to tie this stuff into the last unit that we talked about. All right, so I'm sure I have some grammar mistakes in here because I was talking at the same time as I was typing, but I think this is a good place for us to wrap up. And in the next video, we'll talk about how do we actually submit our explore task. Just make sure that you have for your bibliography here at least 2 sources that were from the last academic year. We talked about that last time after 6/26, 2019. And for each online source, make sure that you do all of these things, okay? If you've been doing that throughout, you should have a pretty complete bibliography that you won't have to be adding to, and you'll be ready just to submit the assignment. All right, guys, talk to you in the next video. Bye.